Every strategy you have attempted to shift the avoidance behavior has failed for the same fundamental reason. The strategies themselves maintained your availability while trying to inspire change, accommodated the avoidance patterns while hoping they would choose differently, and kept you present and invested while attempting to make them want to invest equally. You have tried communicating your needs more clearly, believing that proper explanation would help the avoidant understand what you require. You have established boundaries while continuing to accept behavior that violates those boundaries, hoping your stated limits would eventually be respected. You have given space while remaining emotionally available, waiting for the avoidant to use that space to miss you enough to return with greater presence. You have been patient, understanding, and accommodating, convinced that sufficient acceptance of their limitations would create safety for them to lower their defenses. All these strategies share a fatal flaw. They allow the avoidant to maintain their defended position without consequence because you remain available regardless of their behavior. The avoidant learns through your continued presence that withdrawal costs nothing, that emotional unavailability loses nothing essential, and that they can remain defended while keeping you accessible. Then you make a different move, one that shifts the entire dynamic by eliminating the foundation all previous strategies preserved. You stop being available, not strategically, not temporarily, not as manipulation designed to make them chase you. You become genuinely, authentically unavailable because you have finally chosen yourself over hoping they will change. Because you recognize that accepting their limitations means removing yourself from a relationship with someone whose capacity does not meet your needs. Because you understand that loving yourself requires releasing people who cannot love you adequately, regardless of their reasons for that limitation. This move creates what nothing else could: actual consequence that forces the avoidant to confront that their patterns cost them something they value. Genuine choice between developing capacity they currently lack or accepting permanent loss of connection with you, and clear recognition that maintaining their defended position means losing access to you entirely. The move is becoming genuinely unavailable. Genuine availability differs entirely from the strategic distance most people employ when attempting to shift avoidant behavior. Strategic distance involves creating temporary space while remaining emotionally invested, withdrawing physically while monitoring the avoidance response, and appearing less available while secretly hoping the distance will inspire the avoidant to pursue. This strategic approach fails because the avoidant senses your continued investment beneath the performed distance, recognizes that your unavailability is a tactic rather than truth, and understands that you remain accessible despite appearances. The avoidance defensive structure has developed sophisticated capacity to detect whether someone has genuinely released them or is simply performing release to manipulate their response. Genuine unavailability emerges only after you have completed the internal work of releasing the avoidant, emotionally accepting that the relationship cannot meet your needs, and choosing your well-being over hope that they will transform. This authentic unavailability manifests as complete redirection of your emotional energy away from the avoidant and toward your own life. You are not watching to see whether they notice your absence. You are not performing wellness to make them regret losing you. You are not maintaining channels for them to observe your life or re-enter when they feel ready. You have genuinely moved your focus, investment, and emotional availability away from someone who demonstrated they cannot reciprocate adequately. This authentic unavailability requires that you have processed the relationship and reached acceptance about its limitations, rather than remaining in hope that distance will create change. You cannot fake this internal shift. The avoidant will sense if you are strategically creating distance while secretly hoping they will respond by stepping up. They will detect if you are performing, moving on while actually waiting for them to notice and return transformed. Genuine unavailability means you have actually moved on internally, have released attachment to outcome, and have chosen yourself so completely that whether the avoidant steps up or steps out becomes genuinely irrelevant to your continued well-being. The move creates consequence the avoidant has never faced because all previous responses to their patterns maintained your availability as a safety net. When you communicated hurt but remained present, when you established boundaries but continued engaging, and when you gave space but stayed emotionally accessible. The avoidant learned that their withdrawal generated no permanent cost. They could create distance and you would still be there when they decided to return. They could offer minimal investment and you would continue accepting what little they provided. Your genuine unavailability eliminates this safety net entirely. The avoidant faces that their patterns have created actual loss rather than simply generating frustration. They could ignore or minimize. This unavailability also shifts the power dynamic fundamentally throughout the relationship. The avoidant held power through their willingness to withdraw, their comfort with distance, and their ability to remain emotionally disconnected. You pursued, accommodated, hoped, and worked to maintain connection while they remained defended. Your genuine unavailability reverses this dynamic. You are no longer pursuing someone who withdraws. You are no longer available to someone who previously took your availability for granted. The avoidant discovers that the power they wielded through withdrawal only functions when someone remains available to be affected by it. Once you become genuinely unavailable, their withdrawal becomes irrelevant because you're no longer present to experience it. The move forces the avoidant to actively choose rather than passively receive relationship. When you remained available despite their patterns, the avoidant could maintain connection without deciding whether they wanted it. Because your effort sustained the relationship regardless of their investment, your genuine unavailability means the relationship ends unless the avoidant actively works to restore it. They must pursue, must demonstrate change capacity, and must prove through sustained action that they can provide what a relationship with you requires. This requirement for active choice rather than passive acceptance creates clarity. The avoidant has successfully avoided, do they actually want relationship enough to develop capacities they currently lack? Or was their limited participation only possible because someone else was doing all the work? Your genuine unavailability also communicates information about your worth that words never could. You are demonstrating through action that you value yourself enough to remove yourself from a situation that does not meet your needs, that your self-respect exceeds your attachment to the avoidant, and that you require reciprocal investment rather than accepting one-sided effort. This demonstration cannot be argued against, cannot be minimized, and cannot be reframed. You are showing the avoidant that you deserve more than they have provided and that you believe this enough to act on it rather than simply stating it while continuing to accept insufficient treatment. The move succeeds in forcing the avoidant to step up or step out because it eliminates the comfortable middle ground where they maintained a defended position while keeping you engaged. The avoidant must either develop genuine capacity for greater presence and vulnerability or accept permanent loss of access to you. Your unavailability creates a binary choice where none existed before. The avoidant can no longer offer minimal investment while benefiting from maximal connection. They face clear consequence, provide adequate reciprocity, or lose the relationship entirely. This clarity, delivered through your authentic unavailability rather than through threats or demands, creates conditions where the avoidant's actual capacity and genuine desire become visible rather than remaining obscured by a dynamic where your excessive effort compensated for their defended limitation. Why does this differ from every strategy you've tried? Every previous strategy you employed to improve the avoidance behavior maintained the underlying dynamic where you remained responsible for the relationship's success while the avoidant remained defended. You communicated your needs clearly, but communication alone cannot create capacity in someone who lacks it, and your continued presence, despite unmet needs, taught the avoidant that clear communication required no behavioral change. You establish boundaries, but boundaries you do not enforce through consequence. Teach the avoidant that stated limits have no teeth, that violations cost nothing, and that your boundaries are preferences rather than requirements. You gave space, but space given while remaining emotionally available allows the avoidant to use that space to restore their defenses before returning to minimal engagement rather than to genuinely miss you or develop capacity for greater presence. These strategies failed because they operated from a fundamental misunderstanding about what creates change in defended people. You believed that the right approach, the proper explanation, or the correct amount of patience would help the avoidant see what they were doing and choose differently. Yet the avoidance patterns do not stem from lack of understanding or insufficient information. The avoidant knows their withdrawal hurts you. They recognize their emotional unavailability creates problems. They understand that their defended position prevents genuine intimacy. Knowledge alone creates no motivation for change when the cost of remaining defended feels lower than the terror of becoming vulnerable. Your continued availability, despite their patterns, confirm that remaining defended cost them nothing essential because you stayed regardless. Genuine unavailability differs from these failed strategies because it stops operating from the belief that you can inspire the avoidant to change, and instead operates from acceptance that change must come from the avoidant's own choice, motivated by actual consequence. You are not trying to help them understand what they are losing, because understanding without consequence generates no motivation. You are not attempting to create conditions where they feel safe enough to lower defenses, because safety you create by accommodating their limitations enables their continued defended position. You are not giving them space to miss you while remaining emotionally available, because that dynamic simply gives them relief from intimacy's pressure without requiring genuine examination of their patterns. Your genuine unavailability creates consequence rather than attempting to inspire insight. The avoidant faces actual loss rather than theoretical possibility of loss. They confront that their defended position has cost them a relationship they valued, that their patterns generated permanent rather than temporary damage, and that their choice to remain defended means losing someone who genuinely mattered to them. This consequence operates entirely differently than explanations, boundaries without enforcement, or strategic space while remaining available. Consequence forces choice where previous strategies allowed avoidance. The avoidant must either change or accept the loss, and your unavailability ensures that maintaining a defended position means genuine loss rather than simply continued relationship with someone who accepts less than they deserve. The strategy also differs because it removes you from the position of trying to change the avoidant and places you in the position of choosing yourself. Previous strategies oriented toward the avoidant's development, toward creating conditions for their growth, and toward helping them become more available. This orientation kept your focus external and your energy directed toward someone else's potential rather than toward your own well-being. Genuine unavailability reorients your focus entirely inward. You are not concerning yourself with whether the avoidant develops capacity. You are concerning yourself with protecting your own needs, honoring your own worth, and investing in your own life. This shift from external to internal focus represents a fundamental difference in approach. Your genuine unavailability also eliminates the avoidant's ability to position themselves as the victim of your demands or pressure. When you communicated needs, established boundaries, or requested change, the avoidant could characterize these actions as pressure, as demands, or as your inability to accept them as they are. Your unavailability involves no demands at all. You are not asking them to change. You are accepting them exactly as they are while simultaneously accepting that who they are does not meet your needs. You are making an assessment and acting on it rather than making demands and hoping for compliance. The avoidant cannot characterize your unavailability as pressure because you are not pressuring them toward anything. You are simply no longer available because their demonstrated capacity does not align with your relationship requirements. The strategy differs fundamentally because it operates from outcome independence that previous strategies lacked. When you communicated needs, established boundaries, or created strategic space, you remained invested in the specific outcome that the avoidant would respond by stepping up, by meeting your needs, or by demonstrating changed capacity. This investment in outcome meant you were not genuinely establishing limits, but rather attempting to manipulate a desired response through your actions. Genuine unavailability operates from complete outcome independence. You have released attachment to whether the avoidant steps up or steps out. You have accepted that either outcome is acceptable because you have already chosen yourself. If they step up with genuine sustained change, that is one possible outcome. If they step out and you never hear from them again, that is equally an acceptable outcome because you have already redirected your life away from them. This outcome independence creates authenticity that previous strategies lacked. The avoidant can sense when your actions serve as tactics designed to manipulate their response versus when your actions reflect genuine choice about your own life independent of their reaction. Genuine unavailability carries weight that strategic distance never achieves because it communicates that you have fundamentally shifted your relationship with yourself rather than simply employing a new tactic to shift their behavior. You are no longer the person who will tolerate insufficient investment while hoping for improvement. You have become a person who requires adequate reciprocity and removes yourself when that reciprocity is not present. This transformation in you creates an entirely different dynamic than any previous strategy could generate. How does the avoidance nervous system respond to your unavailability? The avoidance defensive structure has organized around maintaining control through their ability to create and resolve distance on their terms. Their nervous system has learned that withdrawal generates pursuit, that creating space leads to others bridging that space, and that emotional unavailability costs nothing because people remain available despite it. This conditioning has reinforced the avoidance defended position by demonstrating repeatedly that their patterns generate no permanent consequences. The avoidance attachment system has developed around the belief that they can withdraw safely because return remains possible whenever they choose it, and that they control the relationship's emotional temperature through their strategic unavailability. When you become genuinely unavailable, the avoidance nervous system encounters something it has no established pattern for processing. The expected pursuit does not materialize. The space they created remains unbridged. Their emotional unavailability has generated actual rather than theoretical loss. This disruption of expected patterns triggers a cascade of responses in the avoidance attachment system that contradicts their typical defended experience. The avoidance nervous system, which typically experiences relief when creating distance, instead registers alarm that their defensive maneuver has produced an unexpected and unwanted outcome. The initial response often involves the avoidance nervous system activating their attachment system in ways that contradict their defended position. The avoidant, who typically feels suffocated by others' presence, suddenly experiences anxiety about your absence. The avoidant, who usually craves space, discovers that the space feels empty rather than relieving. The avoidant, who historically withdrew to regulate their nervous system, finds that withdrawal no longer provides the comfort it typically generates. This activation of attachment anxiety in someone whose defensive structure exists specifically to prevent such anxiety creates profound internal dissonance that the avoidant has no practice mechanisms for managing. The avoidance nervous system also responds by attempting to restore the familiar dynamic where their withdrawal was met with pursuit. The avoidant may reach out with casual messages designed to test whether you remain available, may create situations that would typically trigger your caretaking response, or may display vulnerability calculated to activate your patterns of accommodating their needs. These attempts represent the avoidance nervous system seeking to restore equilibrium by confirming that you remain accessible despite their patterns. When these attempts meet continued unavailability, when you do not respond in expected ways, the avoidance nervous system must confront that the familiar dynamic has genuinely ended rather than simply paused. This confrontation with permanent rather than temporary change triggers deeper activation in the avoidance attachment system. The avoidant begins experiencing feelings they have spent their life defending against: fear of permanent loss, recognition of genuine caring they could not acknowledge while defended, and awareness of how much you actually mattered despite their minimization of your importance. These feelings emerge specifically because your unavailability eliminates the safety net that allowed their defenses to operate. While you remained available, the avoidant could maintain a defended position because they unconsciously knew you were there. Your genuine unavailability removes this unconscious security, forcing the avoidant to face what losing you actually means. The avoidance nervous system responds to this activation through one of two primary pathways. Some avoidants experience the activation as a threat that demands an increased defensive response. Their nervous system interprets the loss of their safety net as danger requiring further withdrawal, more rigid defenses, or complete emotional shutdown. These avoidants respond to your unavailability by intensifying their defended position, convincing themselves they never cared, reframing the relationship as insignificant, or seeking new connections that allow them to avoid processing the feelings your unavailability activated. This response reveals that these avoidants lack current capacity to override their defensive programming, even when faced with the actual loss of someone who mattered. Other avoidants experience the activation as a wake-up call that penetrates their defensive structure in ways nothing else could. Their nervous system registers that their patterns have generated a consequence they cannot accept, that losing you feels worse than the vulnerability required to change, and that maintaining their defended position means permanent loss they recognize as intolerable. These avoidants respond to your unavailability by beginning genuine examination of their patterns, by seeking help to understand their defensive structure, or by attempting to develop capacities they currently lack. This response demonstrates that these avoidants possess underlying attachment to you strong enough to motivate confronting their defenses rather than simply intensifying them. The avoidance nervous system also responds to your unavailability by experiencing disruption of their self-concept. The avoidant has maintained the belief that their defended independence represents strength, that their emotional distance protects them from pain, and that their patterns reflect healthy autonomy. Your genuine unavailability challenges this self-concept by demonstrating that their defended position has created the very loss they organized their life around preventing. The avoidant faces that their defensive strategies, rather than protecting them, have cost them a relationship that mattered. This recognition threatens their entire psychological structure, forcing reconsideration of beliefs that have governed their relational approach throughout their life. The intensity of the avoidance nervous system response correlates directly with how genuinely attached they were beneath their defended presentation. The avoidant who held minimal genuine attachment experiences your unavailability with relatively little activation. They feel some discomfort at losing the familiar dynamic, but adapt quickly by redirecting to other connections or returning to comfortable defended isolation. The avoidant who developed profound attachment beneath their defenses experiences your unavailability as a crisis that generates intense activation they cannot easily dismiss or manage. The depth of their response reveals the depth of attachment they could not acknowledge while you remained available, and they could maintain a defended position without consequence. Your unavailability forces the avoidance nervous system to process what it has successfully avoided while you remained accessible. Genuine grief about loss, authentic fear about permanent disconnection, and real recognition of what you meant to them. The avoidance defensive structure prevented these feelings from surfacing, while the relationship continued because the defended position requires minimizing attachment significance. Your unavailability eliminates the conditions that allowed this minimization. The avoidant must feel what they have been defending against, because your absence makes the defense no longer functional. Their nervous system responds to this forced feeling through either continued defense that reveals insufficient genuine attachment, or through uncomfortable awakening that demonstrates attachment strong enough to motivate transformation. The two paths your unavailability reveals. Your genuine unavailability creates a decision point that exposes the avoidant's actual capacity and genuine desire with clarity that no previous dynamic could generate. The avoidant faces a binary choice with no comfortable middle ground: develop capacity for greater emotional availability and demonstrate that capacity through sustained behavioral change, or accept permanent loss of relationship with you. This forced choice reveals which of two paths the avoidant will take, and each path provides definitive information about whether the relationship ever had potential to meet your needs, or whether continued investment would have simply prolonged inevitable ending. The first path involves the avoidant choosing their defended position over relationship with you. This choice manifests through the avoidant's absence or through inadequate response that demonstrates they lack either willingness or capacity to develop what relationship with you requires. The avoidant may never reach out after your unavailability becomes apparent, simply accepting the loss and moving forward into their defended life. Alternatively, the avoidant may reach out with gestures too minimal to represent genuine change. Brief messages suggesting reconnection without any demonstrated transformation, temporary increases in effort that revert to old patterns within weeks, or promises of change without actual therapeutic work or sustained behavioral differences. This path reveals crucial information you could not have obtained while remaining available and hoping for change. The avoidant who chooses a defended position over relationship with you demonstrates that their attachment to you, while perhaps real at some level, was insufficient to motivate the uncomfortable work of transformation. These avoidants value their defended safety more than they value connection with you. They prefer the emptiness of their isolated position to the terror of vulnerable intimacy. They would rather lose you permanently than risk the psychological discomfort that developing greater emotional availability would require. This choice provides a definitive answer to the question that may have tormented you throughout the relationship. Could they change if sufficiently motivated? The answer is no, because even permanent loss of you proved insufficient motivation. The avoidant who takes this path also reveals that they fundamentally lack current capacity for the relationship you need, regardless of how much they might claim to care. Caring without capacity to demonstrate that care through adequate presence and vulnerability creates a relationship that cannot meet a secure person's needs. The avoidant who cannot or will not develop greater capacity when faced with losing you completely shows that no amount of patience, understanding, or accommodation from you would ever have created a satisfying partnership. Your continued availability would only have prolonged a dynamic where you accepted insufficient investment while hoping their capacity would somehow spontaneously increase. Their choice to step out rather than step up confirms that walking away was the correct decision that protected you from wasting additional years on someone incapable of meeting you adequately. The second path involves the avoidant recognizing that losing you is unacceptable and committing to genuine transformation of their defensive patterns. This choice manifests through the avoidant taking concrete action that demonstrates serious commitment to change rather than offering empty promises or temporary behavioral adjustments. The avoidant who takes this path enters therapy specifically to address their attachment patterns, engages in sustained personal work to understand and modify their defensive structure, and demonstrates through consistent behavior across months that they are developing capacity they previously lacked. This avoidant makes visible sustained effort that proves their attachment to you exceeds their attachment to their defended position. This path reveals that the avoidant possessed deeper capacity and stronger attachment than their defended behavior suggested. These avoidants needed actual consequence to access motivation for change that your continued availability inadvertently prevented. While you remained available despite their patterns, these avoidants could maintain a comfortable defended position because that position cost them nothing they could not tolerate losing. Your unavailability created a cost they could not accept, generating motivation powerful enough to override their defensive programming. These avoidants discover that fear of losing you permanently exceeds their fear of the vulnerability that transformation requires. The avoidant who takes this path demonstrates change through sustained action rather than through words or promises. They do not simply tell you they will be different. They show you through months of consistent effort that they are actively developing capacity for greater presence, that they are working to understand their patterns, and that they are practicing vulnerability despite the discomfort it generates. This sustained demonstration proves that their motivation for change stems from genuine recognition of what they lost, rather than from temporary panic that will fade once they secure your return. The avoidant who maintains transformation across time shows that your unavailability created a permanent rather than temporary shift in their willingness to examine and modify their defended position. Yet even the avoidant who chooses this path and demonstrates genuine change requires careful evaluation. Some avoidants can develop greater capacity through therapeutic work and consistent practice. They can learn to tolerate vulnerability they previously avoided, can expand their comfort with emotional presence, and can modify defensive patterns that once operated automatically. These avoidants, with sustained effort, can eventually provide a relationship that meets a secure person's needs for consistency and emotional availability. Other avoidants, despite genuine effort and sincere desire to change, discover that their defensive structure is so deeply entrenched that they can only modify it marginally. These avoidants develop slightly greater capacity, but never reach the level of emotional availability that creates a satisfying partnership for a secure person.